Hey folks, I'm Sean C. Davis, and I want to talk to you today about maybe a little bit of a eureka moment that I had last week. And I've gone through a massive change or evolution or whatever we want to call it with my experience in building and using AI code gen tools over the last, it's been a year and a half probably that I've been using them in earnest, but I've really been hammering for the last, I would say maybe 9 months or so. And so I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about that journey and why I feel like something really started to click last week. And I want to share what that was and what vision that led to and where I think I'm going to take that over the next several months. And so it started really with this first 6 months, absolutely flying as soon as it clicked. So I really started playing around with AI coding tools in early 2025. That's when these tools like Bolt really hit the scene and Claude kind of started to it was usable at least, but for a while those tools really sucked. And I kind of went on this journey where it was hard for me to see the future when the present was so painful. But around October of last year or so, I was like, all right, I get it. I see it. It's happening. It's coming together and it's starting to feel pretty decent. And then I just started flying. I started creating all kinds of stuff. But at the same time that was happening, it felt like, okay, yes, I'm creating a lot of stuff, but so is everybody else. Everybody else is creating a bunch of stuff too, to the point where there'd be this new amazing tool that would land on the scene and it would be here on Monday. And then it seemed like by Friday, we weren't even talking about it anymore. It was old news. Why are you using this thing anymore? It was just like, except for those few core tools where they were largely in place 9 months ago and are still here today, it seems like things just like come in to the conversation and then they fall out. And it was pretty exhausting, but I think it led to some discoveries for me along the way. And what I really felt was that I was working across too many surfaces. And part of that was my job. And I'm just trying to, learn about the landscape and understand what folks are developing and what's coming out so that I can educate folks who are working with Netlify and help them make good decisions in the tooling that they're picking. And when the churn is just so fast and ferocious, it gets really hard to do that. And for me, I was then kind of cautious to adopt anything in earnest, beyond, hey, I just want to tinker with this thing for a little bit, just to understand it a little bit. This is what I did with content management systems for years and years. I would basically spin up some example site and understand the opinions that content management system was taking, and enough to be able to teach and share about it and how it compared to these other systems, because about 5, 6, 7 years ago, it seemed like there was a new one on the scene almost every single week. And that's what it's felt like with AI, except it's been more like every single day. And it's not that it's necessarily slowed down. I think people are maybe getting a little wise to that, to say, oh yeah, this new thing landed, but should I really jump on it right away? Or is it still going to be a thing next week? Are we sure it's still going to be a thing next week? I don't know. But as I was trying all of these different things, I felt like I was kind of picking up one thing at a time and using a piece of it. And then by the end, and I would guess that most of you out there have had a similar experience, because around this time also, one thing I noticed was that everybody was just adding AI into their tool. It was like, hey, if you are a startup, if you are developing a product, you need to have AI in your product. And so everybody was just adding these chat features into their products. And we were like, okay, well, what does that mean? And also, what's the surface where I should interact with this thing? Right? Like, just because every product has an agent, does that mean I use the product or I use the agent inside of every product? So I can go to Slack and I can use that agent. I can use Claude directly. I can, oh, geez, I don't know. Like, Amazon has an agent for asking about reviews. Are we using all of these things inside these tools? There were so many surfaces that it became a bit paralyzing to me, really. But I was building a ton of stuff at this time. And a lot of what I was building, again, back in this October, November, December, January timeframe, a lot of what I was building, I would classify as personal apps, personal productivity apps in one way or another. And the way I tell this story, and I have a talk that I posted recently that goes into quite a bit of detail about this particular point in the story. And it's that I felt like for years I was able to build applications to solve my own personal problems when I was using framework like Rails, which really prioritized convention over configuration and made it really easy to move very fast. And then when we got into this decoupled API economy sort of world, you couldn't build things quickly because building something powerful meant stitching 10 plus services together. It sounds ridiculous. It wasn't unusual. If you wanted to build something for real that you were going to use, you had to stitch all of these pieces together. And it didn't mean it was a bad idea. It just it meant that building personal applications was not a great use case for that architecture. Now, with AI, it started to shift. And I felt this desire to go back and say, okay, well, I've been using Notion for years for things like, recording workout challenges or recording the songs that are stuck in my head every day, or trying to get better at plants by logging the lifespan and the challenges that I run up against with houseplants or with the garden or whatever that might be. I wanted to mess with, I guess it would be speech to text at one point. And so I built an app that I invented this really stupid basketball game for my tiny living room that I could play while it was cold outside. And it has ridiculous rules, but I was kind of just like, it's fun to compete with myself. I'm a nerd. And so I was keeping the score in my head, and I was like, well, what if I could just yell, make, miss, and have the scoreboard update itself? And so I built something like that. So just flying and flying and flying. And then as this was happening, I'm starting to dig into more personal productivity tools. So not just capturing data, but also trying to use AI tools to get more efficient with how I work every day. And as I did that, I think that the surfaces and all of the pieces and layers and everything kind of got more tangled up as a result. And so I felt like it was really hard for me in my mind to separate this idea of how do it's hard for me to figure out really even how to talk about this, because these things just felt so connected. Like, all right, I'm going to build the apps in a specific way. And I want that to be consistent because I know I'm going to build a bunch of personal apps. And then I want to use the apps, and I need to figure out how to do that effectively. It's really fun to build UIs that are beautiful, but we need to make them functional too. How do I have agents tap into these things to make them useful? Like with the one of the projects was Botanicard, which would really help me manage my garden and my plants. And so I thought, a lot of times I'm just like taking a photo and sending it to Claude or ChatGPT and saying, what the heck's going on with this plant? And it would look at the photo and analyze it and give me some advice. But then all of that just disappears. I mean, it's not ephemeral, but it is essentially ephemeral. And so I wanted to put that into this app, but to do that, then I've got to build the agent into that app. So what does that look like? Does every personal app get its own agent? And then, how do I actually, how do I use these? How do I manage all of these projects, and where do I fit? In what I mean by that is I can move really fast, but if I'm always distracted, am I actually moving at all? And I think that's being a little bit facetious, because I would say the answer is absolutely yes. It's just hard to keep track of everything. And so I started to take a step back over the last few weeks and say, how do I simplify? It's fun to move fast, and it's fun to be able to create at this rate. And I'm uncovering some really interesting things and building some really interesting things. But I don't think I'm using my time most effectively. I don't think I'm focused. I don't really know where I'm going. And it all just feels like there's too much. There's probably too many projects. There's probably too many surfaces. And there's probably, even in this world today, there is probably a way to simplify. So how do I simplify? And really, I think what it comes down to is, I think there's just a few different components at play here. So essentially, how do we make every app that I build kind of share as much as they can from app to app, so that I'm building in a consistent way using similar services. So it's faster to go from 0 to 1, but it's also faster to go from 1 to 1.1. And what I had started to do was say, well, I'll just build my own shared library. It's like, I want text editors to always, I'd say text editors, text areas I want to be able to type in text areas and have that experience be the same in every single application. Okay, fine. So I will build an NPM package, and then all of these projects will consume it. And it's not like it used to be. I'm not going to have to just manually step through every project and update it. I can have an agent do that. So that should work, right? And so I think that philosophy was good, but as we'll find out, I think that it was missing kind of a key piece here. And so I just needed to figure out, and where do all of these things fit in? How can I simplify so that I reduce the number of surfaces so that I'm using the same tools to speak to the same, use the same, basically I want to use the same tools, right? I don't necessarily want to, I think it's exhausting is what I should say, to be like, well, if you want to get this thing done, you go to Slack. And if you want to get this thing done, you go to GitHub. And if you want to do this thing done, you pull it up into your terminal. And I think there's part of that we're never going to escape from. And as long as it's simple enough, then I think we can make it muscle memory more or less. And then how do I keep a handle on all of this stuff? And those are hard questions to answer. And then about 2 months ago, I had this first layer of epiphany, let's say. And what I realized was that what I was calling an app, what we've all been calling apps for years, this says were never apps. It's not that they were never apps. It's that I think the model of an application was maybe framed in a way that was related to how we could interact with that application for all of the history of the web up until just recently. And what I mean by that is when we think about the architecture of an application, we often talk about it in terms of the back end and the front end, right? And so you're thinking about, okay, where does the data live? And where does the UI live? And that, I think that got further reinforced when we moved to this decoupled architecture, because our front end was then in its own space and our API database layer was in its own space. And so these things felt very separate, but they've also felt separate in frameworks, in monolithic frameworks for years and years. But I think it's different than that now. I don't think it's about the front and the back. I don't think it's about the UI and not the UI, but it's close. Really what I think is it's about how you put data into the system and how you get data out of the system and view it. And in this world of AI, what I really think is you have AI chat that in most cases, not all cases at all. I'm not really going to get super deep into that here. I don't think. Maybe I will. See how many tangents I go on. That chat, an AI chat agent, is largely how you could interact with data. I mean, you think about, let's continue to use my Plan app. For me to make the application capable of putting, of accepting data, of letting users write data to it, I have to build a form into the UI in a very specific way that is looking to accept specific structures. Like it's got to exist and be able to accept that information, and that's got to be set up in parity with the API so that all those data structures are similar. And then the UI, so I got to build that. Do we want to build that? No, because now it's an extra thing. And when you talk about an API, you already had the API. So even if you want to add an MCP server, like that, honestly, it is a trivial amount of work to put an MCP server on top of an API. And in most cases. So why would you spin up a UI that limits your user's ability to write data into a system in a specific way when you can just give them access safely to be able to format, process, write the data however they want to and have their agent interact with your application directly? It doesn't discount the value of the UI. I think the UI is very important. I don't think it should ever go away. I love consuming UIs, but I think that they should be mostly for consuming content. I just think it's not a pleasant experience to consume content through AI agents, and visuals tend to be very important in a lot of content consumption. And so I think that the UI layer that's what it's really important for. So in my estimation right now, an application is really just an agent interface. If you could really think about it, an app, rather than plugging an agent into an app, think about an app, at least a simple personal app, as an agent, right? That's what it is. It's got a way for you to put information into it, and there might be an agent that works with you, that works with the agent of the application to pull that content in. And then on the other side of it, there's the UI, which is just formatting what the agent has saved in a particular way. So I think about it, and maybe it's not an agent specifically, maybe it's an agent system because an agent is a component of it. But I think that it's not that the UI is going to die. It's that there is no reason to build UIs for writing data anymore. but I think the UI itself is essential and should stick around. And so as I had this epiphany, I thought, okay, well, what should I build then? What does this really mean? And I thought, you know what? Okay, if an app is just an agent, then why don't I build an app that is a bunch of agents? But I don't mean web app here. Here I mean desktop application. And so, and the reason that I'm interested in digging into a desktop application is particularly because I don't have to write the code. I don't have to learn it. I mean, I should, and make sure it's safe and all that, but it's just for me, for now. And so what I started thinking about was, okay, what I've done is I've used Claude or whatever AI agent, and I've built MCP servers into these apps. So why don't I just come up with a more formal way to say, here's how you build an agent, and here's how we orchestrate it. So one of the projects I'm working on, which I've been giving, at least started doing regular updates on, is called self-CTL, or self-control. And it is essentially my cockpit. It is where I pull agents together, and I've got a little chat window, and these agents are pretty rudimentary now, but they have identities. I can say, I got one that helps me create or curate content. So I can say, here's what I think I want to do my next video about, and we go back and forth, and says, okay, cool. It's going to manage my backlog of content, but while it's doing that, it's also going to suggest, hey, maybe you should make this social post in preparation for this thing, or something like that. And so that's CTL, and I do hope to distribute that at some point. But I think that the thing that it's really going to make or break this entire system is essentially the framework for the agent. And I am approaching this framework a little bit differently, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because I have a whole other video coming soon, if I haven't published it yet. And that is going to be all about how we build this framework in a conceptual way and in a safe way, because there's a lot of risk in putting all of this stuff in front of agents and giving them all of that control. And so I'll give you the short version here, which is essentially every agent should behave essentially the same, but have different skills, different capabilities, different UIs, different components, and give you, as user and consumer of that framework, the ability to really drive what those agents do in a much more organized, I think organized and controllable way compared to using something like Claude Desktop, which feels like it's very powerful, but it feels like the Wild West a little bit. So through self-CTL, you can ask one of the agents something, and then that agent knows its skills and what it's allowed to do, but all it is actually allowed to do is propose what can be written, what can be changed, etc. And then it asks this deterministic API to start interacting with you, and then we take the agent out of the loop so that the agent doesn't have any keys, it doesn't have any access to be able to write data, and then it's up to you to interact with the deterministic API to approve things. I know that is very abstract. I'll get into that a little bit more in a future video. And now, there's the last piece of the puzzle for me, which is Cubster. This is my working title, at least. And Cubster is essentially this layer that it's more like a thin kind of platform layer on top of Netlify. And right now this exists as just an idea. But it will add a few services that are opinionated to work the way I want this framework to work. And then it will become trivial to say, hey, a framework needs to use, it's going to accept file uploads and then have to deliver those files back. Like, okay, Netlify gives us the exact set of primitives we need to make that happen. But what we want to do with the framework is make sure that that process gets handled exactly the same way from agent to agent. So if we ever find a bug or we want to add a feature or whatever, we update Cubster, and then whatever SDK got updated within that Cubster ecosystem can very easily, all we have to do is tell all those agents to go update themselves, and boom, it should magically work. So it is just a theory now. So it kind of fits together like this. You've got the self-CTL desktop app on top. It communicates with all of these other projects that are they're just Netlify projects. That's the beauty of all of this. And I'm not going deep into that today, but Cubster is a platform that sits on top of Netlify. Every single agent is just an app deployed to Netlify. Netlify's got everything we need to do this, and we're adding more all of the time to make this even more powerful. So I'm really excited about it. It is still just an idea. You saw a screenshot of self-CTL, so it's moving, but it's going to take a while to get there. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that I'm going to do in the interim in a future video. But I'm really excited to see this all come together. It's going to be this system that can do anything and do anything safely. So I hope, if there's one thing I want you to take away today, it's that if you want to design something like this, you can absolutely do this. I'm going through this process, and I'm mostly just thinking deeply and interacting with AI agents. I'm not writing any code. There's nothing here that you can't also do if you want to do it in a bespoke way for yourself in particular. However, I also plan to package this up in some way, maybe through Netlify, maybe through me, maybe open source. I don't really know, but I want to make it available to other folks. And I'm going to continue to share updates on this process, and in both forms, in more like updates as I'm working on things so you can get a peek behind the curtain. But if you're interested in playing with it, if you want to consume it, if you want to help build it, whatever that may be, absolutely get in touch with me. Hit me up in the comments, subscribe, and you'll keep getting peppered with these videos, both on the concepts as they evolve and on the progress of the project. But that's all for this particular subject. I'm Sean C. Davis. Really appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time.